if you mean just broadly expanding chimpanzee consciousness, I think we would have to understand what chimpanzee consciousness is. And I don't think our brain can understand chimpanzee consciousness. I think it's probably two very different types of consciousness, and so it would be difficult for us to do that. I think chimpanzees think in a very chimpanzee way, and humans think in a very human way, and one isn't more better than the other.
Andrew Halloran is a primatologist and former keeper in a wildlife park who challenges the way that science thinks about chimpanzees. He writes about chimpanzees not as members of a distant, abstract species, but as the distinct individual personalities that he has come to know personally. He talks about them and their histories name by name. Higgy, Little Mama, Elgin, Hank, Cindy. He understands that rather than imposing a human consciousness on apes and testing how well apes perform tasks as a human being would, that humans should understand the consciousness of apes on their own terms. And that's not an easy change of point of view for human beings to make. We like to think of ourselves as what the world reflects. But Andrew Halloran was curious about a world that isn't simply a reflection of human consciousness. As a child, Andrew Halloran says that he was fascinated to read about the gorilla Coco in National Geographic magazine and that he desired to talk to a gorilla. And this was before he formulated the idea of a career for himself. Initially, he graduated with a BA in philosophy and theater. He hadn't yet decided on a career as a primatologist working with chimpanzees. His interest in apes came before his initial choice of a career. As he describes it in his book, The Song of the Ape, what provoked him was a strong sense that scientists misunderstood apes. He deliberately started to work with chimpanzees as a keeper in a wildlife park before getting a degree in primatology. That was so his observations wouldn't be hampered by the preconceptions of others. His book, The Song of the Ape, is exceptional in how it gives us a glimpse into the lives of chimpanzees. I'm not a scientist, but I've read a considerable amount of the literature about orangutans and other apes. And if you want a book that creates a closer connection with you and chimpanzees, that doesn't distance you through the abstractions of science, through the abstract research of primatology, this is the book. I'd put it at the top of my list for a type of narrative that Andrew Halloran has created that gives you a sense of observing individual chimpanzees. Now, through the Elgin Center, which he runs, Andrew Halloran expresses his empathy for chimpanzees to help chimpanzees in captivity in zoos and wildlife parks by understanding their needs better. So, how do chimpanzees see and explore their world? If chimpanzees are highly intelligent and can communicate, are they also capable of genuine curiosity, or is that beyond them? What does Andrew Halloran think about this, and how did curiosity develop in him? Andrew, one time you observed a group of 5 odd misfit chimpanzees escape from an island enclosure in a boat in a wildlife park where you manage them. It seems unlikely that this collection of misfits would even be able to organize themselves as a group, yet they did. How did the chimpanzees manage mentally the escape from the island in a boat? Can you describe what you saw and why it matters?
Sure. And first of all, thanks, Shawn, for having me and including me in this discussion. The so what you're describing is kind of what launched my interest in chimpanzee communication, um, which to me is far more interesting in how chimpanzees communicate than what we can teach them, as you alluded to before. Um, what happened in that particular case is that there was a this was at a place called Lion Country Safari in South Florida, and they were very large chimpanzee groups at this time. um, the the group in question was a group of 17, and there was a takeover of the alpha male. And this happens with chimpanzees from time to time. But this particular alpha male was very dominant, had been in charge for decades, actually. And an up and coming male had gotten himself a suitable alliance of females, and there was in me being a very irresponsible zookeeper, had not secured my boat. They lived out on islands, and the boat, it was a windy day, the boat floated over to the island, um, and five chimpanzees climbed on this boat. The chimpanzees that climbed on it were the chimps that had previously been in charge. That was Higgy, who was the alpha male, the alpha female, Jin, a very large female named Cindy, um, the oldest chimp at the time in captivity, a chimp named Little Mama, and a chimp that had all sorts of neurological issues named Elgin. And they were kind of they were the defeated alliance that had been taken over. They got on the boat and they were going to leave the island. Um, at that point, I did what every not thinking well young zookeeper might do, and I jumped in the water to try and push the boat back to the island, which incidentally you should never ever do if you're ever in a similar situation. At that point, Jin, who was the alpha female, picked up a deck brush and hit me very hard over the head with it, causing me to briefly lose consciousness. Luckily, got the chimps back onto the island from the boat, and all was well again. Incidentally, the chimps that were in the alliance that took over ended up going to Chicago to the Lincoln Park Zoo. But what that incident did, for me, was really highlight the fact that chimpanzees can communicate in pretty complex ways. The operation of them taking the boat and having just the alliance escape, and knowing that the boat was floating over, and knowing that the five of them needed to get off the island, to me represented a way of communicating some sort of organization, some sort of alliance, and being able to coordinate that through communication. And that is what spurred me to go on to graduate school and want to study chimpanzee communication more, because it was a lot different from what I had been reading in places like National Geographic and in specials that I had been seeing, and in these celebrity apes, whether it was Coco or Kanzi or Washu, or all of these chimps that were taught to communicate like humans. And to me, it seemed far more interesting to see how chimpanzees were communicating without human help, and to see if we could study that a little bit. And sure enough, I found some great papers by some primatologists that had already been working on this, and it opened the door to a very fascinating, for me, study of how chimpanzees can communicate.
Andrew, I want to ask you the question about which chimpanzee who you've known is the most curious and which the least curious, and how that curiosity affects their lives. You know individual chimpanzees very well as individuals, not as members of species, and the stories you tell about these individuals are intriguing. But I realize that before I ask that question, I need to know the context of whether curiosity in humans and chimpanzees is essentially the same or essentially different. But then I realize that I don't know if we even have the same concept of curiosity or not. How can you and I discuss curiosity if we don't have the same concept? So I'll start with that question and then proceed to the others. What is your definition of curiosity in general?
To me, curiosity is the drive to explore, to learn new things, beyond just say foraging for food and trying to find food. And both chimpanzees and humans rely a great deal on learned behavior, obviously. In humans, it's the basis of what we would define as our culture, what we learn from each other. Chimpanzees also learn from each other. They learn how to use tools that are relevant in their ecosystem. Um, in the in the case of going back to communication, they learn calls from each other. They learn how to behave in their particular group. And this being able to learn helps them survive. They can survive and be pretty resilient in a pretty vast array of different ecosystems because they learn how to survive those. So I think curiosity is inherent in both chimpanzees and humans because that drive to learn helps you survive. And so the ability to explore your surroundings, to explore what might work in your surroundings, to explore what might be fascinating in your surroundings, what might be beneficial in your surroundings, I think are inherent in both species.
Well, it sounds like we have the same basic concept of curiosity. But just to be sure, I want to respond with um, my concept of curiosity and make sure that we're still aligned with that, or whether you disagree. Okay. So, by curiosity, I mean a conscious awareness that something is unknown and a desire to know what that unknown is. There could be a perception that something is unknown and a desire to know what that unknown is. By curiosity, I also make a distinction that curiosity, in its purest form, has no other goal than acquiring information about what isn't known. That means that the search for information is not meant to satisfy a direct, immediate, practical, material reward. In this definition of curiosity, there is curiosity for the sake of curiosity, and perhaps the process is satisfying even if the information isn't obtained. The reason I propose curiosity for its own sake, and I with the proviso of in its purest form, the reason I propose curiosity for its own sake as part of a concept of curiosity is because then you could learn what you didn't intend to learn. and you could learn what you didn't know that you could learn. That's another degree of the discovery process that you talked about as being connected to curiosity. So, to explain this more, some human beings inquire and speculate about things they don't need to know, and consequently, they learn what they didn't expect to learn. So, I use as examples Newton, Darwin, and Einstein, who were somehow motivated to inquire what they didn't need to know and what they didn't have any practical application for them in their lives. They could speculate beyond what was apparent and they could make discoveries they didn't expect. An example from this book, and you might agree or disagree that it's an example of that concept, but I look at your book and I see that you mention the curiosity of the psychologist Gordon Gallup about the consciousness of a reflection in the mirror. The question came to Gallup one day when he was looking at his own reflection in a mirror. And this leads to questions like, what does a mind perceive when it looks in the mirror? What type of consciousness can understand a reflection? What type of consciousness can understand the difference between what it thinks and what another thinks? What type of consciousness has self reflection and is able to differentiate the minds of others? So, my definition of curiosity is a type of consciousness awareness that something is unknown. It's a desire to know what that unknown is. And so, curiosity for the sake of curiosity without a need for an immediate reward from that information, because then you could learn what you didn't intend to learn and learn what you didn't know that you learn. So um, it sounds like we are initially in agreement about what curiosity is, but when I give that description of my concept of curiosity, and that's curiosity in general, do you agree with that, or do you see come at it from a different way?
Well, let's parse that out a bit. I think the initial thing you're talking about is with Gordon Gallup is what we would call theory of mind, the ability to be self-aware, to know that you are an individual acting within the world where your actions have consequences and meaning and so the ability to have that self-awareness, to have that theory of mind, acknowledges that you possess knowledge that others have, and others might possess knowledge that you don't have. This is why Gordon Gallup did the mirror test, because if you could recognize yourself in the mirror, you could recognize that you are an individual and not just kind of watching things on a screen and watching the world go around you. So the ability to have theory of mind, you need that to know that there's an unknown out there and that you need to explore and be curious to do that. I think the second thing you're talking about, and this is, I think, really important, is intrinsic motivation, the ability to do things just for the satisfaction of doing it, not for any particular gain, ecological gain. So chimpanzee, obviously chimpanzee looks for a fig tree, the reward is eating a fig, that there's no intrinsic motivation about that. But does chimpanzee actually enjoy the intrinsic motivation of actually looking for a fig tree? And I think there's plenty of evidence to say that there is a lot of intrinsic motivation in chimpanzee behavior. There's chimpanzees, whether it's playing or whether it's hunting other primates, that they do things that really don't offer them a tremendous amount of ecological benefit, that they still do. And in fact, in when we look at chimpanzees in managed care and human care, and we look at how do we enrich chimpanzee lives, what is proper enrichment for a chimpanzee or any primate or any cognitive species, one of the things you look for is you look for, do you need a degree of intrinsic motivation in this enrichment? Humans are full of living for intrinsic motivation. If you're playing a scramble game on your computer, you're not doing that for any sort of gain other than the intrinsic motivation of it. Same with watching a baseball game. Do chimpanzees do the same thing? And I would say, yeah, the evidence is very much out there that they do, and even just in captive care, the fact that they enjoy intrinsically motivated enrichment items that allow them to search for things that might not, gain them calories or things like that that they would do. Sometimes chimpanzees just enjoy things. Sometimes they enjoy looking through a magazine. Sometimes they enjoy, you know, finding things that aren't food. And that goes to that sense of curiosity and exploration that is inherent in a species that has theory of mind and that also is intrinsically motivated. Incidentally, with the mirror test, chimpanzees do pass the mirror test. They've been given the mirror test and they routinely pass the mirror test. And the mirror test is um, in a laboratory, put a spot on a chimpanzee's head where they can't see it on themselves and look through the mirror, and the chimp tries to wipe it off because they know it's them in the mirror reflection.
Okay, so you don't have any difference of opinion basically with the definition I gave of curiosity, um, and you went through the points, so um, and put it in the context of the scientific theory of mind, and so you checked off that yes, you agree that, um, and it's part of this primatology about um, chimpanzees that they have theory of mind. So you agree that they have um, an awareness that something is not known, which I cited as a criteria for my concept of curiosity. You also agreed with my proposition about curiosity for the sake of curiosity. And you answered that with the term you called intrinsic motivation in chimpanzees. And you added two aspects of that, two aspects of not seeking an immediate reward. You mentioned play activity, which is another type of consciousness. And you also mentioned that they enjoy things just for the sake of enjoying things. So it sounds like we are in agreement on a concept of curiosity. And you've also, in the process, answered the question of whether chimpanzees have this type of curiosity. Um, and I want to go back to some more chimpanzee questions, but first, I want to ask about you um, and your curiosity. Do you have an early memory of being curious and aware of what you didn't know?
I don't think I've ever been asked that before. Yes, I can't think of a time where I wasn't aware that I didn't know things. I can't think of a time that I wasn't aware. When even you know I grew up in central Florida, and behind my house there was woods, and I wasn't allowed to go explore the woods until I got to a certain age. And I remember wondering what was in those woods, and so yeah, I can't remember a time not understanding that there wasn't knowledge that I didn't possess.
Uh, Can you get a sense of how old you might have been when you were first aware that there were unknowns?
As I said, I mean any time in my conscious existence that I can remember at least, and I can probably remember clear back to age 3. again, even being three, looking at the woods, knowing that I didn't know what was beyond those trees. I don't recall ever thinking that that was where the end of my world was the edge of those trees. I think, and I think, you know, that's just kind of part of being human. We always are aware of that.
Yeah, that almost sounds like a description of Marco Polo at 3 years old. Um, you know, when I listen to that, I'm thinking, in a way, it was fortunate that your parents set a boundary for you because you, in setting the boundary, you had the type of mind that was able to figure out there's something beyond that boundary that I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that, and you know, I think that we all probably do that. I don't know of anyone that, when they were young, thought that their world ended at the confines of the walls of their house. I think, everyone. I mean, because I think even if you're, you know, hearing a storybook, if you're being, you know, read to as a very small child, you know that there's a world out there, and you're waiting to get to the end of the story because you don't know what the end is. So I do think that's just part of being human, is that we are constantly made aware that there's things we don't know, and it's a prime mover in our species. It's how we survive, by trying to figure out what those unknowns are.
Next question. I like the science fiction novels of David Brin, which speculate about what Brin calls uplift in intelligent creatures like chimpanzees and dolphins. By uplift, he means the intervention to raise the level of intelligence in an intelligent creature beyond its apparent natural potential so that they can be full partners with human beings. You didn't write a science fiction book about chimpanzees, but do you think it might be possible to raise the level of consciousness and curiosity in chimpanzees? Could they become more conscious and more curious?
I think they're as curious and as conscious as they need to be, just like humans are. I think, you know, where I would probably have a philosophical disagreement with uplift is that what is up? Is up just meaning towards humans or more human like, or is up meaning a greater expanded consciousness? And what is that? What does that actually mean? I think, chimpanzees are aware, and you know, when we was talk about, you know, are they as intelligent as humans? Well, what does that mean? Are they intelligent, or is their intelligence like humans, or are they just, you know, are we all trying to aspire to more intelligence? And again, what is the definition of that intelligence? I mean, a dolphin can find food by bouncing, you know, sound waves off the ocean floor. I mean, is that more intelligent because that than what a human can do? Because we certainly don't have the brain power to do that. What is intelligence? What is that higher consciousness? So I'm not sure there's any need to lift up for a chimpanzee. I think they are as intelligent as a chimpanzee needs to be. We are as intelligent as a human needs to be. We are as conscious as that, and dolphins and so forth. Would be my take on that. If you mean just broadly expanding chimpanzee consciousness, I think we would have to understand what chimpanzee consciousness is, and I don't think our brain can understand chimpanzee consciousness. I think it's probably two very different types of consciousness, and so it would be difficult for us to do that. I think chimpanzees think in a very chimpanzee way, and humans think in a very human way, and one isn't more, you know, better than the other. I think that we think in ways that are relevant to our species. You know, chimpanzees and humans, you know, have, you know, 4 to 6 million years of evolutionary distance apart. There's a lot that happened in that 4 to 6 years in the development of consciousness.
Do you think if we take out the human element, if there was some sort of that um, chimpanzees could evolve to a higher level of consciousness and curiosity?
Again, I'm not sure that's an answerable question because we would have to know something more. We'd have to be able to experience being a chimpanzee to even answer that question. And I've never read a David Brin novel. I'm more of a Charles Dickens guy. But yeah, it would be a difficult question to answer. Now, is chimpanzee consciousness evolving like all other cognitive species? I imagine, but they're adapting, and adapting and evolving isn't always that way. Sometimes it's that way or based on what's needed, and so that's where it becomes a hard question to answer. Ultimately, if you look at the big picture of the book, it's a book about isolation, and it's a book about how you bridge that gap from isolation to not isolation. In terms of you'll do anything to break out of that isolation. There's a chimp in the book, Cindy, who literally jumps from one island to another, sacrificing her infant in the process to avoid isolation. And to me, that's what we can understand about chimpanzees is that need for a rich social environment, the need for cognitive stimulation, the need for freedom of choice to be able to choose and do what we want to do. All else is going to be very, very difficult for us to know about chimpanzees because we can't crawl into their head.